as I thought about the week. Do you believe in a ice age?
Do you think I should turn the air conditioner on?
Yeah, I probably should.
Please hold. Beep. Shutting down. Well, I think it kept recording.
That's okay.
You get to experience some lack of preparation.
The pre-session. Yeah.
You mentioned Ice Age, and I thought, oh, we forgot to turn the air conditioner on.
Exactly.
Do I believe there is an Ice Age?
Yeah. Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations. So, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if... Okay, this gets to a bigger thought / question.
Yeah.
Which is, can God create something to look like it was something?
Sure.
Like, this is a discussion I had with a friend recently, and, talking about creationism and science, Big Bang, evolution, etc., right?
Right.
And so often we get stuck in kind of the Christian world of saying the earth can only be 10,000 years old or whatever, because the timelines have to fit our perception of what the Bible's saying about creation.
Right.
So my question has always been, why can't God create an 8 million year old earth like that?
Right.
With an ice age in the history as well. Or whatever that, all the dinosaurs, all the stuff that we find.
Yeah.
When Adam was created, was he, a fetus? No, God created an old man, not old, but you know what I'm saying.
A developed,
yes.
He was an adult male.
Yeah.
He wasn't an infant, Yeah. So that, I guess that's what, maybe in some ways, I think it probably does come back to, we can probably even simplify that topic of creationism versus, evolution in a way of almost maybe young Earth, old Earth viewpoint. Does the Earth have to be billions? And, well, in some ways, if I'm being honest, years ago, millions, now it's billions, there is that process of evolution in itself that just needs more time as technology, as we understand the complexities of our lives, and I was thinking about it, it was I told you we had a fox attack last week, and I was
on the chicken coop.
It hit the chicken coop, yeah.
And they got 3 of them?
No, it lost 2. But the other one, it reminded me of Mary Beth, because the other one got a chunk of its neck, But it was interesting because I looked at it and it's like, man, what do I do? And, and Mary Beth's podcast, our body has a way of, if you give it what it needs, it heals itself. And, and that night, Lizzie and I got together and, we stitched that chicken's neck up, with some dental floss and, a needle. And it's like, I've been watching this process of that chicken recover.
Wow.
And it's like, yeah, okay, from my perspective, that's that God-given healing. And yet I would recognize, there's this, and it's neat for me because I can understand from the chickens, as I look at the chickens, I can understand how evolutionists would put, birds and reptiles together, because when I look at that chicken, it's like their feet are almost like scales, like a reptile.
Yeah.
But they have feathers like a bird, and I can understand how, to make sense of that evolutionary dynamic, well, these two things happened at the same time. And yet I still see it personally as an aspect of all of the creativity, can go into, the creation. And so therefore, this animal has characteristics of this animal, and, and we have characteristics of some animals even, just because of that, what I would call the creation process. And, for me personally, I just struggle with the complexity that we have as male female to be an evolutionary process. As far as, from me, the aspect of creation makes more sense from a male female dynamic, that God created them in the beginning, male and female. So therefore, we have this, wonderful way to be able to relate to one another, physically, emotionally, spiritually, sexually, all of that, because it was all part of a design, and it wasn't just something that,
worked itself out.
Yeah. Or, it's like, from my perspective, how many quote unquote males and females had to die off before there was this combination that came together that actually worked, in such a way that said, okay, yeah, this is male and this is female, from from all aspects of our human bodies, that kind of thing. But yeah, I guess that's why I wrestle with that, because I've honestly talked with, I remember a lot of discussions with, and people far more intelligent than I by far, who would say, yeah, I believe in some ways there can be old earth characteristics, and, and I value those opinions, but I'm kind of more like you, the fact that, fossil fuels and diamonds and so forth, that can be created in part of the creation as is.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you were referring to, the 8 million year old Earth,
right,
at the snap of a finger type thing.
And to me, that, like, if you're gonna choose to believe in creationism, you have to believe in a being so powerful, so ginormous. No matter what level of creation you believe, if you believe it was designed and created by a creator, whether he created it 1 kajillion years ago and set it in motion, and it was like the watch pieces in a box that you shook around for 8 kajillion years and eventually formed into a watch, or you believe that he created it all just like that. The ginormity of this being that you believe in,
yes,
is capable of anything, right? Like, especially from our feeble brains.
I hear you.
Depending on what you believe about this particular deity. Of course, I believe in it personally in God, and like that He is all powerful, like we talked about in recently. But so then nothing is inexplainable. Where I think sometimes we get locked down to, well, it has to be this way because the Bible said 7 days, or it has to be this way because I have to be able to explain it,
I have to be able to understand it.
Yeah, or I have to be able to fit it, right, somehow.
Yeah.
And again, I just think, why didn't, because I think He did. Why didn't He create this, world that is 8 million years old with all the patterns and all? And so, part of the reason I say this is because there's a lot of things we pin to the flood. We say, oh, that was because of the flood. That's why this is this way, and I feel like a lot of that stuff makes so much sense. And you're like, oh yeah, that the Earth was covered and whatever. And there's a lot of scientific explanation that scientists who are believers will do based on the worldwide flood of Noah's day. And I think it's fascinating. I love it. But then there are some things they say that's like, that feels like a stretch. That feels more like just part of His creation that creating an old Earth or whatever.
Can you give me an example? Just out of curiosity.
Not offhand.
That's okay.
It's been a while since. And ultimately, I'm not claiming to be a scientist who knows better than whatever. I'm just saying the answers are not that out of reach for me, because I believe in such a big God that he can create exactly what you're seeing. You're seeing, like I said, a cajillion-year-old universe. You're seeing there's the Webb telescope. Did you hear about that?
No, but I'd be
There's a
fascinated.
new like a Hubble telescope, but a brand new fancy pants one they sent up, and it's going out much further than Hubble. And we just got back the first picture from it yesterday, and they released the first picture, and it's really, really cool. I'm going to keep talking and try and look it up so I can show you and we'll have to put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
I can't talk
It's okay.
and type at the
Well,
same.
I'm thinking about it from a space technology type thing, because I think there are interesting things when we think about a old world versus new world, because I think it comes together at times when we factor science into it. When we go to outer space, it's like I think of the was it not the rover, but the lunar lander that they early on in the space era, they put those big huge pods on the bottom of it, so when it landed, it wouldn't just fall into this millions of years of dust particles that are on the moon. And then they realized, the dust wasn't nearly as thick as we figured for, based on a 1,000,000-year-old Earth, because they had such big pods on that, on the feet, because they expected when it landed, they had calculated for how much dust should be on the moon. Because when we think about it, and so that's kind of where I come from at times, is how that conflict of what I think should be sometimes proves itself not to be.
Right.
I'm always interested. So when you were talking about space, that's automatically what came to mind for me. Is it's like this process of, okay, which direction does it go? How does it lean?
Yeah.
And granted, we all pick up those tidbits, if you will, that are part of our confirmation bias, if you will, that says, oh yeah, that justifies what I believe. And yet it's not my desire to do that, but whenever I hear, little tidbits like that, it's fascinating to me how sometimes, my view can get so stuck in what something is that it's only until I come up against something that my view can't explain that I really have to say, okay, what do I think about this? And that's why I was asking you, about that. But back to the telescope.
The telescope picture. You have to check it out.
Cool.
It's really cool.
It is cool.
So this picture,
which we will post,
is just a grid, a square basically, but it's just filled with stars. And if you look closer, there's tons of galaxies in there. And they're saying this picture represents like a grain of sand size. Like if you hold a grain of sand in your hand out in front of you,
sure,
get your arm stretched out and you're holding a grain of sand, you look at that grain of sand, that's how much of the sky this picture is.
Sure, it's kind of like a pixel, if you will.
Yeah,
in a picture, it's just a very small square.
Right.
And
yet you can't count the number of galaxies and stars you see in it. It's just so cool.
Wow.
And the farther
it reminds me of those I Spy books that you look at. It's the page
true.
is so full.
That's true.
It's like, oh, there's a gold one, there's a blue one, there's a orange one, there.
Or you ever play those magic eye?
Where you have to stare at them to develop the image.
Cross your eyes.
Yeah.
Pull it. Yeah. It's kind of like that.
This is more developed than that, but yeah, I hear where you're coming from. If you
cross your eyes and pull back, I wonder if we'll see aliens in this picture.
There you go. It might spell something. It might Yahweh.
That's right. It might.
No.
No, what was so cool about this is essentially the farther you see, which represents far, right? Because it's it's light. I don't know. It's hard to explain.
It's okay.
But basically, what they're saying is these are pictures of the oldest pictures of the universe that we have. And you think, oldest? That doesn't make sense when you look at a picture. Mm-hmm. But it's because the farther, a source of light is from you when you see it.
Sure.
That's how
time is measured.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. In the ability that light has
so the
to
amount
travel.
of time it took for these pieces of light to get to that telescope, they're saying this is as close to the beginning of the Big Bang as we've ever seen, right?
Oh, gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah.
It's a little bit mind-bending when you think about it, but that's
when you think about how far these things are away.
Yeah.
And considering we've gone further, this telescope has gone further than we've ever gone before, and yet that light is still reached that area. Mm-hmm. That's further back into our history, the history of the Earth, if you will, or the galaxy, the universe, excuse me, yes, than we've ever been before. Yeah. And
it's counterintuitive if you don't think about this stuff much, because you think you flip the light switch on, it's instantly light.
Sure.
So you think, oh, stars, that's what they look like right now.
Right.
But they're so far away.
Sure.
That it's not. It's what they looked like 8 bajillion years ago or whatever their number they make up, right?
Yeah, and when you factor in that speed of light,
186,000
miles per second,
which
roughly,
is a light year, right?
That's a light year, yeah. It's like, that's how far. It's not 6 feet across the room that light has traveled. So even to think about it that far in a second and realize this is, a lot further than that. So you factor that light years of time in there. That is a fascinating thing to think about.
Looking at some of these orbs, it's like, that's not what this one looks like right now. That's what that one looks like.
Yeah.
I don't know, whatever number. A long time ago.
In reality, some of these might not even be.
Right, exactly.
Is the reality of it by the time the light traveled that far.
Yep.
But that's how it was at that point when the light was emitted.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here's one of the... It says, this image shows the galaxy cluster SMACS 0723 as it appeared 4.6 billion years ago, with many more galaxies in front of and behind the cluster. And this is, like I said, this is the first picture they've released. But they're saying 4.6 billion years ago. Yeah. Right? That's what these are old pictures,
Yeah. Or so it would say.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's where we run into, I think that becomes the frustration on both sides at times, is purported as fact.
Right.
You follow me? And it's like, well, is there a possibility? And I don't want to minimize personal relationship, but I think from a theoretical standpoint, I do like what other people have done with intelligent design. Mm-hmm. You follow me? I'm not saying that God isn't personal and desiring, but I think as a theory for educational purposes, intelligent design needs to be a part of that discussion, versus just saying, no, it's this way.
It's an equally viable faith as what's being taught.
Sure.
Right? Because we cannot prove so much of what is taught as fact.
Yes.
Right? It's all theoretical. It's science, which is great.
Right.
But like you said, the intelligent design is equally viable.
Yes.
It explains things, and we would argue way better, right? It explains things much more easily when you go, how can this be? Well, it was created by a being beyond your imagination who is intelligent and designed it to be exactly like this.
Exactly.
To the minute detail, to the quark detail and beyond.
Right.
That's how.
Yeah.
And it's much simpler when you can go, oh yeah, okay, so it's just designed that way. That actually explains so much.
Right.
That it was designed that way. As opposed to, well, somehow it just stuck all the parts of a watch in a box.
Yeah.
And you started shaking it for 4.6 billion years plus. Yeah. And you open the box and look at that. There's a watch. It's created, you know. And not only is there a watch, but it's talking. It's a talking watch with a soul and a heart.
It's a smartwatch.
Right.
It's a smartwatch.
Smartwatch. Yeah. And so, if you refuse to believe in intelligent design, which is not even, you don't have to believe in deity to believe in intelligent design.
Correct.
You know, you don't have to believe in,
I think, you know, once you get to a point of, from my perspective, understanding intelligent design, I think you have to ask that question, you know, what is the purpose of this creation?
You don't have to. As a scientist, you don't have to.
That's correct.
Or I guess really as anybody. But yeah, you're right. That's the natural next step.
It's like when I see these stars out there, what is the purpose? And I think that adds to the ginormity as you know, and yet still the relationship that this is created for us to be able to see in such a way that demonstrates a desire for relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I you know, and unfortunately I think there is a connector to where, as we, you know, I'll say devalue relationship, you know, with technology and that kind of thing. And you know, it's like, if this is, was it 4 billion? 4 billion?
4.6 billion.
You know, then I have to call, I think there's the other end of the spectrum. I have to call a bunch of things into question as far as, what is my purpose? What is my value if I'm just in a box that got shook together? Do I have a purpose in that? Is there, you know, and I think that leads to other questions as far as, you know, just the value of our lives, in that, am I here for a reason, or am I just here as part of a biological process of the creation? I mean, excuse me, of evolution. You know, I'm just part of the steps to get to the next step, the next evolution, the next phase, you know, that kind of thing. Because I think if that's, I can understand a certain hopelessness that would go along with that. And I think that's sad for me sometimes when I think about that. And yeah. And, you know, scientists don't necessarily have the time to ask all those questions or answer them for you. So you're left grappling with, you know, this 4.6 billion light years wide universe that we are able to observe, and we're alone, and this all happened by chance. And it's like, those existential struggles are left to everyone else, which, you know, what, I think you can struggle with some existential stuff, whether you believe in, you know, an intelligent design or not, but no doubt. I agree that we can struggle with purpose. You know, I think for me, you know, I think 4 fundamentals are those aspects of acceptance, identity, security, and purpose. You know, I think everybody, you know, has those 4 struggles to a certain degree. Where do I go for acceptance? Where do I go, you know, who am I? What is my identity? You know, where does security come from? What is the purpose of my life here? You know, what am I to do? That kind of thing. And I think everybody has that struggle. But I think, you know, where you look or have looked, you know, to find those things kind of helps develop who we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, you know, that factors into this, you know, the discussion, and maybe even moving back to the discussion a little more as far as, you know, creation versus the evolution, or the young earth versus the old earth. Because I think, you know, even in creation dynamics, you can have a young earth view or an old earth view, and that's where the questions come from.
Yeah, and yeah, we get very tied to the creation narrative in Genesis. And I've heard some very compelling talks about how that's a poem written by, yeah, and so it's meant to evoke certain poetic understanding versus like a literal thing.
Sure.
But the person doing the talk on this and explaining this, that's their theory as much as it, and I think what I love about the idea that God is big enough is that it doesn't really matter. Right? If Genesis is literal, I believe it's possible. If it's just a poem that kind of figuratively explains how an artist perceived it happening, that doesn't hurt my feelings either, because I believe that he did create us, and that's throughout the whole Bible. That is truth that we can easily hold to. It doesn't matter the origins, and yet I definitely know a lot of people who struggle with, if that's not true, what is? You know what I mean? In which I understand that perspective too.
If you make it a poem, then what else is
a poem?
Figurative, or whatever else is a poem. I understand where you're coming from with that. And I think
I'm not necessarily saying I think it's a poem, but I think that's an interesting theory that I'm not afraid of, I guess.
Yeah, but it doesn't create a knee-jerk reaction within you if someone... Now. That's a good point, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be able to say, oh, yeah, you're attacking my view of what, Genesis is. And, and that's, another fascinating part.
It's speaking of polarization, I mean, it's a very polarized thing. Both, I mean, obviously two polars being intelligent design and, just natural selection, evolution, that whole, kind of those are two polar ends, right?
Yeah.
One or the other. But then even within Christian circles, like young earth, old earth, all of these things, there's so many polars and so many areas to feel attacked in. Yeah. Really.
And I think it's interesting too. I mean, when we had our free will, podcast release, and it's interesting too. Even when I think about how God initially created the earth, and from my perspective, the intelligent design, it's like I do believe that based on what we have, there was I am a proponent of the canopy theory. That the earth was created with a water canopy around it that made it very much like a greenhouse. And in Genesis it talks about how springs came up from the ground to water the earth, and that's what made it faith for Noah, because he had never seen it rain before. So to have to build this ark, and it's like go ahead.
Yeah, and that that I think that's a great theory, and I like it. I don't,
Yeah.
But they talk a lot about that's how people lived to be thousands of years old. That's how dinosaurs existed. That's how so many things were possible, was a result of this thick water vapor canopy over. Yeah. Which I think is really fascinating. And it was the source of the water from the flood, right? Like that.
Yes, it provided the source. When Scripture refers to the windows of heaven opened up, that explains this canopy theory, and that's why we have woolly mammoths at the North Pole with fruit leaves in their mouths and so forth, because of this whole greenhouse type dynamic. Now, do I hitch all my horses to that wagon? No, and but exactly. But at the same time, it does. When I think about how we still have these aquifers today, in and around, that are underneath, throughout the United States, that, that's where our source of water comes from still. Yeah. So it's not a stretch for me to think, that was, and the fact that, but I think about it from the aspect of even that was still part of the design, whether it was or whether it wasn't. God had a plan, whether that's how he did it, whether that's not how he did it. It's like, it's still kind of fascinating to think about that. Yeah, it could be all of that and still even more. And yes, there is the reality that, in that whole timeline, men and dinosaurs existed at the same time, and we don't have to have this, well, one came for the other, with the intelligent design dynamic. And, I don't want to come across that I'm bashing one or the other, but I think, if we want, I believe I have to be able to look at science in such a way that says, okay, this picture's 4 billion years old. And yet, if I'm going to do that, I want somebody else to be able to say, yeah, but what do we do with this when we go back and we see, human footprints next to dinosaur footprints at the same time? What does science say about that? Because then that messes with our evolutionary, our Big Bang, or how do we, how do we have an orbit in the process of a Big Bang? When you blow stuff up, it's pretty linear, from that epicenter of the explosion. And granted, that's a limited mindset on my part. I admit that. But yet I see this, what's the process when something has a tremendous order and it becomes more chaotic
entropy, I think.
Yes. It's something to that. There's laws that go with that process. Nothing gets more designed,
constructed,
it's
clean, etc.
It's a process of the chaos over time. And there's a dynamic name, I think, associated with that, but I'm not able to bring it up right at the moment.
I think it's the law of entropy, right? I don't know. I'm Googling it right now.
It could very well be. It sounds right.
It sounds
close.
Intelligent. Which is close enough. Nope, I'm Googling it. We're going to find out right now.
I leave the intelligent stuff to you.
Second law of thermodynamics. Entropy is central to the second law, which states that the energy of isolated systems left to spontaneous...
Pause. Spontaneous.
Where'd it go?
You're in charge of technology, my friend.
We were reading the Google snippet, but it didn't have all of it. So
we got the ellipse and we lost it.
This is it, though.
But yes, being able to recognize that, in the process of life, we don't see things getting more organized. And, I think that from that perspective becomes a difficult part for me to say, okay, time doesn't just make it all go away.
Right.
And the fact that we have to have more time and more time to explain some of these things just makes it less credible for me over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even time is not if we're going to believe in a being who can have created this universe, then we also have to understand that time was a construct designed by him, completely malleable in his hands. Right? And again, going back to the Genesis thing where it says a day, I mean, there's lots of places in the Bible where it talks about a day being 1,000 years, and so, that's right. So then you can go, oh, well, if that's the case, then maybe this did happen millions of years before this, even in the Genesis account. Because I've heard this theory a lot, too, where it's like, no, actually, it does represent that timeline you're talking about, even in the creation process. But whatever thing is true there, time is not a static thing that cannot be bent. We've even proven that, right? The theory of relativity, by we, I mean Einstein. I didn't come up with this.
We have not done that on this podcast. No, you don't go back. Don't search for the previous podcast where we. But as humans, yes.
Maybe one day, but not yet. Yeah, as humans, we have proven that time is relative, which is basically saying that it's malleable or whatever. So in the hands of a creator who can create something as vast as the universe, then making time fast. You think about like I think about like a DJ with his.
Oh yeah,
right,
yeah,
like
the record.
Right, and it's
and
like they take a normal song, they speed it up for a minute, and they slow it down, right? And it's this whole idea of manipulating time for the sake of creativity. Right?
Yeah.
Why can't that be part of this story where, yeah, we have some time that looks like billions of years, and we have some time that looks like the dinosaur and human footprints are on the same, plane or whatever, and time does answer it because time wasn't this static, constant thing that we associated with based on the small amount of time that we've experienced as, a human race, right? Where we understand it to have laws and certain distinctions. But even that, again, has been stretched and bent, and as relativity and these things have come up, and we go, wait a second, I don't think time is what we think it is. Yeah. I think it's a little more like this. It's a little more like that. It's like, I think,
Yeah.
And again, that, for me, from a faith perspective, grants so much liberty to understanding a lot of the time-based, conversations in the Bible, or
Okay.
and from Genesis and kind of the timetables there all the way to Revelations and the timetables there. And even the theological discussion of where do you go when you die? Do you go to a holding place called paradise, or do you go directly to go heaven, or do you go directly, to the judgment seat of Christ and just wait around for a couple thousand years till everyone shows up who's late, whatever.
Right.
Or is there, again, something, time is a construct that he created for our particular universe, and when we pass on, we're no longer bound by that construct. And therefore we are in the same place as everyone else at the judgment seat of Christ, and that's happening when you die, or like, what I'm saying? All of these things are completely viable when it comes to a God who doesn't care about what you think about time.
Valid point. And I think that when we take on my view is right, then that becomes a difficult thing to hear. Because I'll be honest, part of me recognizes that, I don't think there's anything that science has discovered that we can't necessarily find. In other words, that when Solomon talks about nothing new under the sun, I think at times we have this part. I would dare say, thinking about it, when you part of your education, how many of us have seen that evolution of man? Sketch where you start off with a small monkey and you kind of Neanderthal man, and you kind of grow up and, and it's like, we've all been, I shouldn't say all, many of us have been exposed to that. And I think we bring that concept with us to a point of saying, okay, everybody that was before me was just dumb. You follow me? They were the cave. That's a caveman way of thinking, and I think we still do that some. Anybody that's different from me thinks like remember the Geico? Was it the Geico commercial that had the caveman? Yeah.
So easy a caveman can do it.
Exactly. Yeah. I think there's that process, that we take.
We're not sponsored by Geico yet.
We're open to sponsorship, but not yet. But at that point, I think we can take on that perspective that says, well, if you just think differently than me, you haven't gotten to the point that I have yet. And I think when I think of Solomon, I think of Solomon being every bit as educated, as intelligent as we are today. And from my perspective, I think in some cases we've lost intelligence, from a practical, even when I think of, someone like Jefferson, who, kept all of his documentation, for seasons and weather and, and patterns that were able to be discovered to where, I just think sometimes we think too highly of ourselves compared to our forefathers in having stuff figured out. And I think the same can be true of the Bible, you know, and being able to say, how did Daniel, you know, figure these things out? How did he, you know, and the numbers, whether you believe that time can be manipulated or not, it's like what he said proves out in history that it was this segment of time, you know, that, you know, they were in exile, you know, and it just, that's what comes to mind when you think of time. And I think, you know, there is a order and a structure in it that is beneficial when we look back and say, okay, there is a plan, there is a purpose, and what that person predicted was also what actually happened in history. All the, if you will, all the prophecies of Jesus were fulfilled in his life, even though they happened so much longer ago. And I guess that's what I bring into this discussion, is the ability to say, God knows, whether I do or not. And yet we have science has yet to disprove scripture, where, you know, but if science disagrees with scripture, I'm going to be a little subject about that science, because I'm concerned that it just hasn't caught up yet. You know, and I realize that's a polarizing perspective on my part, but yet I realize other people probably extend that in the other direction as well. And that's what makes this discussion.
Or if something, essentially, to flesh out what you just said, if something bears out through science to prove more of an intelligent design, for instance, which all of science does, because it just gets more complex the deeper you go.
Yes.
Then, like you said, it's just our science hasn't caught up yet. We don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
It's this inverse of what you just said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like what you're saying about humanity and our intelligence, because what we have today is not a greater intelligence, but the thousands of years of what we've built to stand on. You get what I'm saying?
Flesh it out a little more for me. 1,000 years to stand on.
Right. So essentially, all the learning and all the documentation and all the things that we have gained in previous, you know,
throughout history.
What's the word? Generations.
Okay,
Generations.
yeah.
Previous generations, as we got better at documenting these things, as we got better about building things that wouldn't fall apart the next generation.
Gotcha.
Right? The better we were able to retain what we gained up to that point and then move it forward. And so you see this kind of, if you think of it, a line that's kind of slowly inching upwards, and then right near the end it goes faster and faster and higher, right?
Right.
That's kind of our technology curve, right? It's this idea that, and now we have the internet, now we have computers, now we have these things that will retain everything that we've ever accomplished from this point back. And so we can build on that, and we continue to do that. That's how we have computers, and that's how computers are now cars, and that's how, you know what I mean? It's like all these things. And so we think of ourselves as this much more intelligent because of these things, when really we're the same intelligent with better tools.
I hear you.
You know, better
I understand.
Technological tools.
Yeah.
Our mental tools are the same.
Yeah.
Like you said, maybe even degraded because of our technological tools.
Precisely.
Where we rely on those things. And like you said, you see so much in history of how intelligent they were to be able to remember all this stuff, memorize. You know, you even I think about like the colonial days and the primer books they would use.
Oh, yeah. The little
like,
readers and so forth,
And you just like look at excerpts of that, and it's just insanely hard.
Yeah.
And yet little school children were learning these things and memorizing these things, and it's just a matter of course for them. And I don't think they had more brain capacity than we do. I think they were forced to use it in a different way than we are. And now we have the shoulders of giants to stand on in terms of computers and Google. And I don't have to know anything at any given point, because I can Google it and get you the answer.
Yeah.
Which is an incredible, amazing thing that we've accomplished. And yet, where does that leave my brain? Well, it leaves it more dependent on this kind of global brain, right?
Yes.
Which in some ways is great. Some ways it is great, because we're going to continue to expand and grow technologically, which I can't wait till we talk about artificial intelligence, because that's part of this discussion. And it's on our list of topics, and I think it's kind of a fascinating topic. But the point is, we're continually exponentially growing our technological side of things, but we're still stupid.
Understood.
We still hate each other. We still kill each other. We still do such caveman things.
Human things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that is an interesting discussion. And like you said, I love reading the Bible and thinking about the fact that some of the oldest words in there were written by someone 10,000 years ago, maybe. Is that right? Or give or take.
Yeah,
who knows?
Whoever,
8,000, 7,000, whatever
6,
that number.
10, yeah. Whatever that young Earth creation dynamic is.
And you hear what they're writing, and it's like, this person was more intelligent than me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, we believe in God's word being inspired by God.
Sure.
But they were documenting events that were occurring, and it was our civilization. The same pettiness, the same jealousy, and yet the same courageousness that we can sometimes exhibit today. Like, it's the same story. It's not a picture of a less evolved society, except for the technological part.
Yeah. No,
right?
I hear where yeah, and it's interesting. I think when I think about it, and like I say, this probably isn't heading in the same direction as we started about,
No,
but when I think of evolution, I think we can tend to think that this technology curve will continue, and artificial intelligence, and yet there's a part of me that when I look back historically speaking, I think those not to the same degree technologically, but I think there have been societies, Roman society, that said, oh, we've come so far, and therefore we don't need God. We don't need these trappings, if you will, of creator and it's just that's kind of that other side of that spectrum. It makes me wonder, will there come a day when we won't be able to be, when technology may fail as well, and are we gonna be? And I'm like I say, I'm not a doom and gloomer, but it's something that I think about. When I recognize as a society, when we get so far down this road of thinking we got it all figured out, that God doesn't matter. And so they, like you say, that's kind of where I balance even this, evolutionary, intelligent design creator type dynamic. It's like, okay, if we go so far in one direction that we ignore the other half, for me, it's kind of, in some ways, it's similar to our tendency to prefer rationale versus emotion. You know what I mean? So if we're denying, all one full part of it, we're ignoring one part of the continuum. It's like we're missing out on the fullness of what we've been given, the experience that we have as a human to be able to think and feel. And I think, when we take that so far that we're not able to see, how light has traveled so far, or we just want to ignore any aspect of design, I think it's a similar thing. We're missing out on the wholeness of that creation from my perspective, or, I'm definitely willing to hear somebody else's perspective on, that's part of why I think we've been, how I see things evolving. And I think, I don't mean to make that as convoluted as it probably will sound, but bring it together for us,
we got
Justin.
54 seconds. So to summarize what I think you just said, but what I feel pretty strongly about is, what's so cool about it is we have a creator, but not just a creator.
Yeah.
We have a personal relationship with a savior. That's how we believe, right,
Yes.
Mark? And so I have a relationship with this creator to where I can go, guess what I learned today? This sounds cool. What do you, show me, give me insight. Let me understand this better. and I can talk to him about it. I can have faith. I can say, maybe this isn't right. Maybe this is wrong. But it sure is fascinating, and it's fun to think about that you could have done this.
Yes.
And ultimately, we have that opportunity to have an open mind and a conversation with our Savior, our Creator of the universe.
Yes.
And it makes all that a little less scary. If I can go talk to Daddy who created it all and say, hey, what do you think?
Yes.
And then leave it in his capable hands. And I don't know, it makes reading this stuff and experiencing the science, like the new breakthroughs and stuff, just that much more fun and exciting to be able to say, it doesn't scare me.
It doesn't rattle who I am, and right. Oh my God, yeah.
And I hope that would be true for each of our listeners.
Yeah.
Oh, I was wrong. We had more than...
Yeah, well, it's okay. I think we have a full hour, but I think you wrapped it up well.
We're going to go for another hour, folks. You heard Mark. So,
not another hour, but as opposed to 50 minutes, right. Where we thought...
50 seconds. No, 50 minutes. Yeah.
You thought the segment. But that's okay.
That is okay, because that's...
how we see it.
Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like How I See It, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one.